$3. That's what the rub on the best brisket I've ever cooked actually cost me. And I've watched people pay $38 a pound for burnt ends that didn't taste half as good. Down here in Texas, the old-timers season a $70 prime brisket and a $12 chuck roast with the exact same two ingredients, and both come off the pit so tender you can pull them apart with a plastic fork. But here's what took me years to figure out. The rub isn't really a recipe, it's a chemistry trick, and once you understand it, the cheapest meat in the grocery store starts falling apart like it cost you a fortune. So let me show you exactly what's in it, why it works, and how to use it on chuck roast, pork butt, beef ribs, whatever bargain cut is sitting in the discount bin this week. First, the rub itself, because I don't want you waiting 12 minutes for it. The base is what pitmasters in Central Texas call a Dalmatian rub, kosher salt and coarse ground black pepper. That's the whole foundation. The famous joints in Lockhart, places that have been smoking meat since the 1930s, built their entire reputation on some version of salt and pepper and almost nothing else. A 3-pound box of kosher salt runs about $3 and will season everything you smoke for a year. 16 mesh black pepper, the coarse restaurant grind, costs a few dollars more up front, but a single batch of rub uses maybe 40 cents worth. Now, the mix. For beef, I go equal parts by volume. Half a cup of kosher salt, half a cup of coarse black pepper, shaken together in an old spice jar. That 50-50 ratio is the classic Central Texas profile. Some folks run it heavier on pepper, 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt, and that gives you a darker, spicier bark. Both work. What you don't do is use fine table salt, and I'll explain why that ruins everything in a minute. For pork and chicken, I add 2 things. A 1/4 cup of coarse salt, a 1/4 cup of pepper, 2 tablespoons of paprika, and a tablespoon of garlic powder. The paprika isn't there for flavor as much as color. It's loaded with sugars and pigments that turn mahogany in smoke. Total cost per batch, right around $3. That jar will carry you through 4 or 5 cooks. That's the recipe. You could stop the video right now and go make it. But if you do, you'll miss the part that actually matters, because the ingredients are maybe 20% of this. The other 80% is what the salt does inside the meat while you're not watching. And that's the piece almost everybody gets wrong. Here's the thing about salt. It's the only ingredient in your rub that actually travels. Pepper, paprika, garlic, all of that sits on the surface and builds bark. Salt penetrates. When you coat a chuck roast in kosher salt, the salt pulls moisture out of the meat in the first 20 minutes or so. Sounds bad, right? It's the opposite. That moisture dissolves the salt into a concentrated brine sitting right on the surface. And then the brine gets reabsorbed, carrying salt deep into the muscle. This is called a dry brine, and it's the same principle a steakhouse uses when it salts steaks a day ahead. And the salt isn't just seasoning on the way in, it's dissolving proteins. Specifically, it unwinds a protein called myosin, one of the main proteins that makes muscle fibers contract and grip tight. Salt loosens that grip. Meat that's been dry brined overnight holds noticeably more of its own juice through a long cook, which is exactly what a cheap, lean, unforgiving cut needs. Which brings me to timing, and this is the first place the $3 rub beats the $15 bottle from the store. You apply it the night before, not an hour before you light the fire. 12 to 24 hours ahead, meat goes on a wire rack, uncovered in the fridge. The salt needs those hours to travel. Rub applied right before the cook is surface seasoning. Rub applied the night before is a transformation that goes half an inch deep. Same $3, completely different result, and the only ingredient that changed was time. But the store-bought bottle has a bigger problem than timing, and it's printed right there on the label. Look at the ingredients on almost any commercial BBQ rub, and the first line says sugar. Sometimes it's the first and third ingredient wearing 2 different names, dextrose and brown sugar. Sugar is cheap filler, which is why it's in there, and sugar burns at around 350 degrees. That's fine for ribs at 250. It's a disaster the moment your fire spikes or you finish something hot. And it's the reason so many backyard cooks end up with bark that tastes like a burnt marshmallow wrapped around pot roast. The Texas rub has no sugar at all. It cannot burn. You can run it at 225 or sear over open coals at 500 and the crust just gets better. Now for the pepper, because it's doing a job most people never notice. Coarse 16 mesh pepper isn't just flavor, it's architecture. Those big cracked pieces create a rough, jagged surface all over the meat, and every jagged edge is a place for smoke to grab and for rendered fat to pool and fry. That's where bark comes from. Bark is not a coating that the rub forms on its own. It's a slow-motion crust built over hours where pepper, salt, smoke, fat, and dissolved meat proteins fuse into that black, crunchy, almost beef jerky layer that people fight over. Fine ground pepper packs flat like dust and gives you a soft, gray, disappointing surface. The coarse grind is non-negotiable. If your grocery store doesn't carry it, buy whole peppercorns and pulse them in a cheap coffee grinder. 10 seconds. Done. So the salt tenderizes from the inside and holds the juice in. The pepper builds the crust on the outside. But neither one of them is what makes the meat literally fall apart. And I want to be straight with you about that, because this is where every magic rub video on this platform lies to you. No rub on earth makes meat fall apart by itself. What makes cheap meat fall apart is collagen, and collagen answers to temperature and time. Cheap cuts are cheap because they're tough, and they're tough because they come from muscles that worked hard. Chuck is shoulder, brisket is chest, pork butt is shoulder again. Working muscles are threaded through with connective tissue, and that tissue is mostly collagen, which is basically nature's rope. Cook a chuck roast to 145 like a steak, and that rope is still rope, which is why the cut got dismissed as pot roast material in the first place. But hold that same roast between roughly 190 and 205 degrees internal, and the collagen surrenders. It breaks down into gelatin, the same stuff in Jell-O, and suddenly every strand of that tough meat is coated in rich, slippery, melted gelatin. That's the fall apart. That's the whole secret. Tough cuts don't lack quality. They're holding more gelatin than the expensive cuts ever will, and the rub's job is to keep the meat seasoned, juicy, and armored in bark for the 8 or 10 hours it takes to get there. Here's the part I love. The expensive cuts can't even play this game. A filet mignon has almost no collagen. Take it to 2 or 3 degrees and you get $60 of sawdust. The $12 chuck roast comes out of that same cook tasting like brisket. Down here, folks have been calling smoked chuck exactly that for generations. Poor man's brisket. The system was never rigged toward the expensive meat. Low and slow, it's rigged the other way. So here's the full play, start to finish. Night before, trim the hard fat, coat the meat in the 50-50 rub until it looks like asphalt, rack it uncovered in the fridge. Next morning, smoker at 250, meat goes on cold from the fridge because cold surfaces attract more smoke. Then you leave it alone until the internal temperature hits about 165 and the bark is set, meaning it doesn't smear when you press it. At 165, the meat stalls, evaporation flatlines the temperature for hours, so you wrap it tight in butcher paper or foil and push on to 203. Then the step nobody has the patience for. Rest it wrapped in a dry cooler for at least an hour. The juices redistribute and the gelatin settles into every fiber. Skip the rest, and you'll watch everything you worked for run out onto the cutting board. Do that with a chuck roast one time, and you will never look at the discount meat bin the same way again. And if you want the whole system in one place, the exact trims, the wrap timing, the temp charts for chuck, pork butt, and ribs, I put all of it into my Poor Man's Brisket ebook, so you're not scrubbing back through this video with smoke in your eyes. Scan the QR on screen or grab the link in the description. All right, back to the pit. Because there's one mistake left that ruins more cheap meat cooks than everything else combined, and it happens after the meat comes off. Slicing direction. Every muscle has a grain, the direction the fibers run, and on a chuck roast or brisket flat, those fibers can run 6 inches long. Slice parallel to them and every bite is a 6-inch bundle of rope your teeth have to shred, and people blame the meat, the rub, the smoker, everything but the knife. Slice across the grain, and those fibers get cut down to 1/4-inch segments that fall apart at a touch. Same meat, same cook. The difference between chewy and how is this $12 meat is literally which way you turn the roast before the first cut. On chuck, watch out. The grain changes direction partway through, so keep reading the meat and turning as you slice. One more thing before I let you go. The rub scales down too. You don't need a smoker for the chemistry to work. Same salt and pepper dry brine on a chuck roast, then a 275-degree oven on a rack for 6 or 7 hours to that same 203 internal, and you'll get 90% of the result with zero smoke. A cast iron sear at the end fakes the bark shockingly well. The rub, the brine time, the collagen window, the rest, the slice. Those 5 things are the entire game, and not one of them costs money. They cost attention. Which leaves the question I keep turning over every time I watch somebody at the meat counter reach past the chuck for the prime grade. For about 100 years, the cuts we're talking about were what packing plants practically gave away, and the people who couldn't afford better were quietly eating the best barbecue in America. Now brisket costs more than ribeye did a decade ago, precisely because the world caught on. So here's what I want to know. What's the cut everyone in your area still overlooks? The one you'd rather they never figure out? Tell me in the comments, because that's next month's cook. And if this saved you from one more $40 barbecue disappointment, the next video breaks down the $5 offset smoker mods that fix a cheap pit's temperature swings for good. I'll see you there. Word count 2004.